Do you want to know which wide receivers you can count on to win in week 11 of fantasy football? We're here to tell you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click on the little notification bell before you go. But first, Chris, who are you going to count on this week at wide receiver?
Yeah, some pretty good options this week, and I'm going to start with my start of the week, and that's Terry McLaurin of my Washington football team. Now, I know he only has a 20% target share with Alex Smith under quarterback, so he's not getting, force-fed the way he was with Kyle Allen or Dwayne Haskins, but it doesn't matter because he still has that big playability, even with Alex Smith. And they're playing Cincinnati, who over the last 3 games are giving up an average of 220 yards to receivers and more than 2 touchdowns per game. No reason to think he's not going to catch another long touchdown in this one and have a monster week. You got to start him anywhere you have him.
Yeah, and even though that target share might be a little deceiving because there's so many dump offs and targets, going to J.D. McKissick. But if you look at the air yard share for McLaurin, it's a lot higher. So I'm going to go with a guy that's finally living up to expectations, and that's JuJu Smith-Schuster, of course. This offense can support, obviously, 3 wide receivers and a tight end and a quarterback. James Conner, not so much. We talked about him in our running back episode, but I mean, you've got to start all your receivers for Pittsburgh this week because going against Jacksonville, we know this is one of the worst pass defenses in the league, one of the most, teams that's reeling, and they're looking ahead, obviously, to next year. I don't think they'll put up too much of a fight. So you can start with confidence, like I said, Johnson, Claypool, JuJu, but I got JuJu number 1 because the last couple of weeks he's been one of the top targets, not just for Pittsburgh, but out of all wide receivers. The floor is so high, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and I talked about Jacksonville on our running back start sit, which you should watch as well if you haven't already. They've been very, very good against the run lately, not against the pass. So definitely you got to think Pittsburgh, they're just going to throw the ball all day and just torch this Jacksonville secondary as they should. My next must start is a rookie out there in Minnesota. That's Justin Jefferson going against Dallas. And I know Dallas, the defense hasn't been quite the, fantasy-friendly defense that we saw earlier in the year, but it's still really bad. And if you look at the last 3 wide receiver ones against Dallas, Terry McLaurin, 7 catches, 90 yards, a touchdown. Travis Fulgham, 6 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown. And then JuJu, who you just mentioned, 6 catches, 93 yards, and a touchdown. And don't drop a comment telling me that Adam Thielen is a wide receiver 1. Justin Jefferson gets the bulk of the targets from Kirk Cousins. He is the wide receiver 1 on this team, like it or not. So I expect a big game from Justin Jefferson this week.
At this point, I mean, it's like you can expect a big game from Justin Jefferson any week because, I mean, he's been, obviously, there's several rookie wide receivers who are starting to show up, but I think it's clear to say he's been the best one so far, even in tough matchup, like you said, with the Bears. I mean, it shows that he's almost matchup proof. So, yeah, you got to love him when it's a better matchup. And speaking of that very game with another rookie wide receiver, I'm going to go with CeeDee Lamb. And that's a little bit more questionable, not because of him personally, but who's the quarterback for Dallas? It looks like it's going to be Andy Dalton. He's been activated. I'm pretty sure that he's going to get the call. Does that make a difference? Well, with Garrett Gilbert at quarterback the last game, Lamb actually came through with 71 yards and a touchdown. With Dalton, we kind of have to throw those results out the window because that first game, is basically they got blown out. He put up garbage time stats. And then the next game he got hurt. Can Andy Dalton turn things around? I'm not going to try to answer that question, but I know that he's a competent quarterback. I know that Lamb will get targets. And you know what? This Minnesota defense, as much as they look like they've improved lately, they are still giving up plenty of points to wide receivers. Trust me, the Bears made them look a lot better on defense than they really are. I trust Lamb. I know a lot of people will be off of him just because of that whole situation. Just remember, really good wide receiver, competent quarterback, bad secondary. That adds up to, for me, a must start.
Yeah, I like all the Dallas pass catchers this week. Obviously, Gallup, very boomer bust. But in this matchup, you got to like them all. And then my final must start is Kenny Golladay, who did practice today coming off that hip injury. I know it's been a frustrating year if you have Kenny Golladay, but if you got him, you can roll him out there, treat him like a wide receiver 1 this week because Carolina over the last 2 games have allowed 437 yards and 4 touchdowns to wide receivers. That's over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns per game to wide receivers. If he's out there, he's a locked-in wide receiver 1 this week. Don't worry about the injury or anything.
Yeah, a lot of craziness there, that situation, from what I was seeing in practice reports. So Kenny Golladay is back, and just when that happens, Marvin Jones and Damian Amendola both missing practice, and Matt Stafford is questionable going into because of his thumb. They're thinking maybe he'll play, but even so, I think Golladay will be just fine, especially if Jones doesn't play or Amendola or both. Well, then Golladay is just going to get peppered with targets from Chase Daniel or Matt Stafford, whoever. It doesn't matter. All right, and then I'm going to go with somebody who a couple of weeks ago was the hot waiver wire pickup. At this point, he better be on roster, at least somewhere in your league. If he's not, you better pick him up. But Jakobi Meyers in New England, I think it's pretty clear he's a wide receiver 1 there. I think it's becoming clear that he's a wide receiver 3 at the very least in fantasy, especially PPR, one of the leading target getters out of all wide receivers the last few weeks. Okay, and then going against Houston's secondary, we know how bad Houston has been. This is going to be a matchup. I think it's kind of ripe for fantasy. A lot of points could go back and forth either way. So, Myers at this point, you should feel pretty good starting him.
Yeah, when he went out there and looked good against Baltimore, that was pretty much the point where you have to consider him an every week must start. I know some of his points came from a touchdown pass, but he still caught plenty of passes, racked up the yards, looked good against a really tough defense. At that point, he becomes an every week must start. I agree. I like him a lot this week.
Exactly. If you can produce points, I don't care how you do it, right? I mean, the fact that they're getting him involved that way, it shows that they trust him, right? Whether it's carries or they're throwing the ball, I don't care. Give me fantasy points. I'll take them. All right. These guys might not give you fantasy points. Here are must-sit wide receivers for week 11. Chris, lead things off.
Yeah, I'm starting with Travis Fulgham in Philadelphia. The Eagles are getting healthier. Zach Ertz off IR, Alshon Jeffrey there, Jalen Reagor back. His target share is going way down, and I expect that trend to continue. And this is not a good matchup against Cleveland, right? They're very stingy against wide receivers, allowing just 155 yards to wide receivers per game over the last 3 games. So I want no part. I know he was great there for that stretch, but at this point, I want no part of Travis Fulgham anymore.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you picked Fulgham, not me, because I feel I've been anti-Fulgham for weeks now. And, I did mention in the waiver wire for wide receiver video this week, talking about Jalen Reagor, this is the time to add him. I think it's already happening. He's the number 1 target there. All right, I'm going to go with a guy that I don't know anymore what to expect, but I do know it's a really tough matchup against the Rams. We know that they have the best secondary, I think, arguably, but the best secondary in the league. Mike Evans, boomer bust last week. Yeah, he got fed, and they finally got him involved after doing nothing the week before. And I think this is going to be another letdown game because, again, the Rams are just those defenses that you can't expect much from wide receivers anyways. I'm backing off Evans, if I can afford to.
Yeah, Evans is tough to figure out, right? Because you can always catch a touchdown. But with Brown there, with Godwin, with Gronk kind of emerging, with Fournette catching passes out of the backfield, you never know what to expect. And I agree. In a tough matchup like this, with Jalen Ramsey potentially shadowing him, we saw what Jalen Ramsey just did to DK Metcalf. I think you got to bench Mike Evans this week. And then my final must sit is a guy that we've been relying on week after week, and I think it's time to stop relying on him, and that's Robby Anderson out there in Carolina. Early in the year, it looked like he was going to be a breakout, borderline wide receiver 1, every week wide receiver 2. But we've seen they're getting Curtis Samuel more involved. They're starting to get DJ more involved. His target share has been coming down week after week. And now against Detroit, which you might think on paper is a great matchup, they've only allowed 153 yards per game to wide receivers over the last 2 games. That secondary has gotten right. It's gotten good. The other thing is he's starting to catch those short, underneath routes, not those big play routes that we expect from Robby Anderson. He's getting those little 5-yard, 8-yard routes. So he's not racking up a lot of yards either. So I think Robby Anderson is a guy that if you can, you should be benching this week.
Yeah, actually, it's hard to believe, but it's true. We've gone, downhill quickly from a fantasy point of view. But 2 other little things to notice. Number 1, Detroit defense, one of the worst, I think maybe the worst statistically against the run. So it might not need to pass a whole lot, but also Teddy Bridgewater, remember, he was banged up. He was questionable heading into the beginning of this week as far as what he would play. Might not be 100%. Who knows? There's been a couple of times already where he's come out of the game early. So just a little shaky situation there, combined with Detroit's pass defense getting better. This could be a low-scoring game. So, yeah, a lot of reasons to kind of be skeptical there. And then I am a very skeptical guy who I know has been a hot pickup, and some people say, oh, you got to start him. No, you don't. Marquez Valdes-Scantling. No MVS for me. Sorry, because number one, you're going against the best. I know it's called the Rams defense the best. Rams defense have the best pass defense statistically in the league. Colts have the best overall defense. I think they have the second best pass defense in the league. So for what that's worth. So MVS will have a tough time getting open, but also Allen Lazard is back. That is obviously going to eat into, the target share there. He might have another game or two down the road where he goes off for a long touchdown, but I cannot count on him, especially this week for fantasy.
Yeah. MVS had some nice games there, but with Lazard coming back in this matchup, obviously you're starting Devontae Adams, but you still got to be a little nervous if you have Devontae Adams because his defense is so good. But outside of that, I want no part of this passing game.
Absolutely. All right, so those are our must starts and sits for week 11 at the wide receiver position. Of course, we talk about running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends, everything you need. Just hit subscribe. You catch all the latest if you hit that little notification bell. Good luck in week 11, and thanks for watching.